Hello, everyone. Very happy Memorial Day. I'm very pleased today to invite Dr. Pascal Lottaz, an associate professor at Kyoto University. Pascal received his MA and PhD from the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Japan and specializes on neutral actors in international relations, especially on neutrality during the two world wars and during the Cold War. He recently published the books Sweden, Japan, and the Long Second World War, and Permanent Neutrality, a model for peace, security, and justice, and Notions of Neutralities by Lexington Books. He currently leads the research network at neutralitystudies.com. Pascal, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I have been a great admirer of your work for some time now. Neutrality studies has introduced me to great thinkers who really strike at the heart of some of the most pressing questions of the modern era. I think, Pascal, you and I can both agree that we're living in uniquely challenging times and are witnessing quite incredible changes, real tectonic shifts geopolitically. I think the full ramifications of which are not even close to being appreciated by people our own age. So I very much appreciate your dedication to furthering our understanding and providing context for the history we are living at this critical juncture. So thank you, Pascal, with both hands wide open.
Carissa, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure of talking to you. And yes, I think from the few minutes we discussed before the program, I think we align on a lot of our thinking.
Yes. Well, I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to finally speak with you. I'm a longtime admirer of your podcast, and I'm looking very forward to seeing the directions you take it over the next couple of years. But Pascal, let's start out. Tell me a little bit about your work in your own words. What are you most interested in, and how did you come to be interested in this field?
So I've always been interested in questions of war and peace. That goes back a long time. 10, 15 years ago, I was working in this tiny little NGO in Switzerland called the Peace Village, a place that tried to do, it's kind of an outgrowth of the hippie movement of the late 60s, early 70s, and they survived for 50 years. They had their own, a couple of buildings, and they rent them out, and then they have like kumbaya sessions. It was really, really pretty. And then they also tried to do, practical work. One of the programs they had that I was closely associated with was violence prevention with young adults. So teaching like 13, 14, 15-year-olds how to have conflicts without making them go into violence. And, this question of what is violence? Like, is it only when one guy beats up another one? Or like if the police officer has to beat up somebody who just stole jewelry, is that violence or not? And then you get them to think about how they themselves conceptualize violence. And that was quite interesting. This was a kind of a brainy approach trying to solve an issue of very concrete problems on the ground that I was involved with for a couple of years. But then I went more into an academic direction because, these issues are important, and violence on the ground, as you will know, as a surgeon working with people who get wounded and end up in hospital, that is important. But there are other issues, structural issues that make entire countries wound each other each other badly. And this is where my passion for history also came in. So I decided to do a PhD and study one of the unexplored parts of the Second World War, because the thing is over now for 80 years, but believe it or not, we still don't know all the things about everything. Yes. And I naturally kind of ended up looking at neutral states, so Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland, and their relationship with Japan, because nobody bothered to look at that, because, the Europeans, they always have this habit of looking at themselves and not at the outside. So I took care of that and wrote about what they did during the Second World War. And turns out, but just by virtue of not being belligerent, you turn neutral. And although the Switzerland and Spain were qualitatively very, very different. One was a direct democracy, Sweden too, a parliamentary democracy, and Spain was a dictatorship under Francisco Franco, an absolute dictatorship. The guy killed a lot of his own people. But diplomatically, these entities were able to do the same thing in Japan just by virtue of not being part of the war. And they actually did, more or less. I mean, there were differences, but they were able to play the same role. And I found that fascinating, because that's something that we weren't thinking about when we think about neutral actors usually. So I decided to kind of go down that route, and I now make this neutrality studies my thing, and I try to sell it on all the channels I can. I mean, academically and on YouTube and so on, to tell people, look, this is a real chance we have. It is a little bit complex, but it's actually very old, and it has real chances not of bringing world peace, because the contradiction is that if you're a neutralist, you also agree that there's war, because without war, there's no neutrality. But it has the chance of pacifying or lowering the heat, which is what it often did in the 19th century. And that is something I believe could be of value in the future, again, in conjunction with this lofty goal of banishing war altogether, which we've been trying for 100 years. For 100 years, we've said war is illegal. We're not going to do it anymore. It's illegal. And for 100 years, we have been doing war. So we have this problem that we have de facto, de jure outlawed war, and de facto we still have it. That's why de facto we also still have neutrality. And I think we should build capacity in order to use that instrument of international law and international politics in order to try to pacify the international system a little bit. But yeah, we can talk more about this. That's me.
Well, I'm curious, Pascal, reflecting on your own intellectual development and who influenced your thinking the most as a young scholar. Who would you identify in that realm? Who left a great impression on you?
Well, one of the people who left a great impression on me was a guy called Glasel. Not Victor. Fritz. Fritz is his short name. Sorry, Glasel, Mr. Glasel. I actually interviewed him on my channel. And he wrote the books about he wrote important books about conflict prevention. I used him in that Peace Village. You know, his theories are very practical. An escalation ladder. You know how conflicts grow out of proportion, and you start from just giving each other a little bit of spite, and you end up in mutually assured destruction. On the interpersonal level, when you know, in a Mexican draw, when both decide, okay, I die, but he dies too, therefore, boom, let's go. And countries do that too. That's something that impacted me, because I saw that you can like try to analyze and work out commonalities of conflicts on various levels. And then I also studied philosophy for 3 years, and during that time, and in high school, and I did a lot of reading that I still find very fascinating. And one of the people that influenced me a lot was John Stuart Mill and his utilitarianism. I know a lot of people don't like him because Mill is actually more on this I mean, he belonged to the people who were colonizers, definitely, and he was an kind of an, for the lack of a better term, like in the neoliberal camp. But his philosophy and everything is very, very useful, and he's actually also a humanist in the sense of like practical steps toward building a humanistic society that somehow works. And I like that guy and his writing very much. And who else would have? I mean, my my doctor father, Shinichi Kitoka, is a Japanese. I studied under him for several years, and he influenced me with his teaching very much, because he's also very much about practical approaches to international relations, and he's a historian, a great historian. So you've got to be precise, as precise as possible in your research, but then you have to draw general conclusions.
Sure.
And I think that's something that's that we should do as much as possible. Understand the details, but once you do, bring it back to something concrete in order to get more than just the details of history.
Sure. That's actually a really nice segue into what I wanted to ask you, Pascal, is, you know, we study things in school for years, often for years, and then we learn to practice them in the real world. And oftentimes it's only when we start working that we appreciate the limitations or constraints of our own education. So I wanted to ask you what the biggest surprises to you in that transition has been from your days as a student and young scholar to now where you are today, trying to understand a rapidly changing world. And how have the current global conflicts influenced your understanding of the relevance or necessity of neutrality?
Well, one of the things that surprised me is really how when you start studying a certain subject, how long it takes until you actually get an overview of the field, and how long it takes for you to understand your own mistakes a couple of years ago, or your own misconceptions, not necessarily mistakes, just ways that you thought, oh, I was pretty constrained in how I thought about this topic. It takes years. And one of these examples would be that in my master's that I did at the same institute where I later did my PhD, I focused for an entire year basically on this concept of the responsibility to protect, R2P, and I found it a very interesting approach to trying to solve again issues of war and peace. And I studied it in detail and wrote my master's thesis about it. And only later, by now, I understand, oh, R2P is more or less just a neocon approach to justify invasions, which already was criticized back then. But and I included that criticism, but I didn't comprehend the impact and also the timeline when the concept was introduced. Because once you start studying stuff from the inside, once you're in the box, you start losing view of the outside, of where things come from, also politically and historical developments. And I think this is very, very important, especially at the moment when people constantly try to sell us something as a God-given fact. Like, Vladimir Putin on the 24th of February 2022 invaded Ukraine, innocent Ukraine, and this is just an act of barbary. He's Hitler. It's a fact, an established fact, and now we have to reason from within the box, right?
Right.
And if you do that, and if you follow that chain, then you will fall into the trap of actually becoming part of that movement. So you need to get outside of that box and try to look at things as comprehensively as possible, in order to have a chance to kind of grasp where also these arguments are too constrained. And of course, these are rhetorical tricks that we're seeing at the moment. But people are not. I don't believe that there's a lot of evil people. There are probably some psychopaths out there. Most likely, we know that from medicine. There are people that are called psychopaths, and their neural networks work differently from others. But those people are not even necessarily evil. They just like for instance, empathy and so on. And then the rest, we fall into categories of social behavior, and then as a group, we move in certain ways, and that includes us. There is no in international politics or international relations, in this what we are doing, there are no observer independent actors. We are all observers and actors at the same time. We all influence the system, and as such, we need to include our own analysis and so on into the greater whole. I see this very clearly with the people who have very strong beliefs about how the world works. They take themselves out from the world, and then they tell you that they're now analyzing what the world is about. And they're independent observers, right? So they give you the whole picture, and they give you everything, and they themselves are they're just the wise people that can interpret everything for you. And that is, of course, part of a stupid narrative of being inside one of these boxes. And it took me a long while to realize that one, and our own fallibility, right? How we need to also work with that, the fact that we cannot get everything, but we still have to produce something. And I think you as a doctor, you also have to work with that you can't be sure about what's going on with your patient all the time, but you're still forced to do the best you can.
Of course. I think it was Hannah Arendt who said most of the evil in the world is just perpetrated by bored careerist bureaucrats.
I should have mentioned her. I should have mentioned her, because her book, The Banality of Evil, is another one of those pivotal works that helped to open my eyes. She was criticized for that. She was criticized for saying that Eichmann was not pure evil. Eichmann was just banal. He was basically too constrained in his thoughts to understand the grand scheme of things that he's participating in. And her analysis is absolutely correct. That's where the evil comes from. But what these people wanted back then, and what people still want today, and what you see with the Ukraine discourse and with Israel Gaza, is that people want good and evil, especially in the US and Europe. We want good and evil. And I had a very interesting discussion with an Australian colleague with Chinese roots who says, like, look, this is a very, very Western-centric concept. In other cultures, we don't do this Manichaean worldview. We have
Yeah.
gradients. We have other approaches. So this is a particularly, for lack of a better term, like Euro-American kind of,
Absolutely.
Anglo-American kind of way of conceptualizing the world, and it seeps through into the deepest depths of academia and politics, and that's how dumb it is. It's
Yeah.
just dumb. Then when you tell that these people, no, everything is very complicated, but Putin is Hitler. Therefore, Jesus Christ. Okay.
That's I share your frustration, Pascal.
Thank you.
There's been a purging of all subtlety and nuance from our discourse nationally, and I think in Europe as well. So
yeah. Yes,
yeah,
it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
And you know, I keep saying, like, if we don't step away from this, I mean, at least for the Europeans, the Americans are outside of that, but for the Europeans, it will be the 5th time in 400 years that we walk into a general war.
Yes.
Since the 30 Years' War, the 5th time. I still hope we avert it. But we are still, I mean, if you look at what's happening at the moment in Scandinavia and in the rhetoric about Ukraine and in the way that certain people, especially the neocons in both sides of the Atlantic, would like to escalate with Russia.
Yeah.
We could land in this. And I mean,
yeah.
Again, like, it just, and then everybody will say, like, oh no, but we didn't do it. The other side did it. The other side is evil. We just want peace. It's like, yes, that's exactly what we've been saying every single time. Can't you realize that you're inside the box? You're inside the box.
Yes.
Not outside. You're inside. No. The Russians are. No, you are inside that box, the escalation box, and we need to get out of the box. Yes. Please.
Yes. You are in fact building the box around all of us and sealing our shared fates.
Yes, war is something that starts in your mind. And, you know, like I've looked at these, you look at the pictures of especially the First World War. The First World War is highly instructive because the current moment is much more like the first than like the second. And look at the pictures of the soldiers in August 1914 in Germany, in Germany, in the UK, in France, in Italy, in Austria. The soldiers who are on these wagons, on these train cars, they laugh, they smile, they wave, they're happy. It's like finally something is happening, you know. It has been a boring 70 years and we have had boring lives, and now we're going. And then, you know, on the train it's written like in German, Christmas in Paris, see you in on the Champs-Élysées 3 months from now. Like, they were happy to go. And if you want a proper war, a big one, you need to sell war to your own population, right? And we are being sold war at the moment. I included the Russians in that too, and others, you know. The populations need to swallow the idea that war is now necessary. And once enough people do that, you have millions of mostly young men, but also young women, who will be ready and willing to go and try to shoot other young men and young women. And they will both say, we don't want this, but we will do it.
Sure.
Because it's necessary and patriotic duty and all of the BS. And it's not even very difficult. So that's why I keep telling my students, if somebody asks you, go and kill that person, just say no. Just say no. It's like whatever they come up with, but there's reasons that come from above that will be very difficult to resist, especially when you're 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
It's like why it's so mean that these old people always use these young people who have so much left to learn in order to fight their wars.
Yeah. So tell me, Pascal, your work offers a perspective that differs quite starkly from the Atlanticist worldview currently, and certainly from the rhetoric popular in my corner of the world. I think, unfortunately, war is our sole, steadfast, bipartisan commitment. So tell me a little bit more about your experience as perhaps a conscientious objector to the mainstream narrative of war where you are.
Yeah, so on the one hand, I am also officially a conscientious objector. You know, Switzerland has mandatory military service, but I didn't go to that because I said I don't want to learn how to kill somebody. And they accepted me, and I was allowed to go for 1 year and work in a hospital instead of that, which was lovely. I learned a lot of very useful things there. So I used to be let's say, a proper pacifist back in the past, thinking, we have no right to kill anyone, therefore, including self-defense, I ruled that out. By now, trying to think about how countries work, I have adjusted that stance a bit, saying like, no, there is, although I have the right to refuse for myself to fight, I don't think I would have the right for my neighbors to tell them that you are not allowed to defend yourself when somebody attacks us as a group, right? We need to differentiate between the individual and the group. And when we then think about how we create policies, there are ways of structuring defense policy that is inherently self-defensive, like structured around defense, and there's ways of doing it offensively. And I oppose the offensive version of self-defense.
Sure.
And, for the last 100 years, we've been sold war by virtue of selling as self-defense, right? Every war the United States fought in the past 50, 60, 70 years, it did in the name of defending the US at home by fighting abroad.
Sure.
The Korean War was maybe the first one, but that one was still a bit special. I mean, that was a kind of an in-between thing. But then the Vietnam War clearly fought, at least in the public, the way it was publicly broadcasted, as self-defense because of the domino theory, right? If South Vietnam falls, then Cambodia, Laos will fall, and then the rest, and then tomorrow we've got the communists in San Francisco. Right? That was the lunatic idea, but that was the basic justification why it is important that American boys and girls die somewhere in Southeast Asia's jungles, right? So, and then it continued, and the tragedy is that once the Cold War was over, and Jack Matlock, America's last ambassador to the Soviet Union, who I had on my channel a couple of times, he keeps repeating at the age of 94, at top of his lungs, the United States didn't win the Cold War. We, together with the Soviets, we negotiated to an end. It ended in 1989 because we agreed we would end it, and we ended it. And then 2 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed out of connected but different internal reasons. There was no winning of the war. It was a settlement of the war, and that's how we misremember it. Is what he says, and I think that's very, very pertinent. Because what this led to is this triumphalism that we've been seeing over the last 30 years. And then the increase of warfare, actually. After the end of the Cold War, we've now a great book. I think her name is O'Rourke, from the University of Chicago, or I need to look it up. O'Rourke is her name. And she wrote a great book about covert operations, US covert operations. Wait, no, it's not that one that I want to talk about. No, there's I need to look it up and send it to you, but there's good study about the conflicts, armed conflicts that the US is involved in, and they actually increase over time. And there's more, the US is involved in more conflicts or regime change operations since the end of the Cold War than before. And so the peace dividend never appeared. What appeared is basically this idea that whatever we can do, we will do it. And the pinnacle of that was the Iraq War. A pure, utter war of aggression, no doubt about it, sold with a lie. But even if that lie had been true, even if there had been weapons of mass destruction, it would still not have been enough for a legal case under international law to justify what George Bush did. He tried to justify that with the preventive warfare. But preventive warfare, according to just war theory and also to international law, is not a legitimate reason for attack, only preemptive. Only once the missiles are loaded and are about to be launched to you, only at that moment you can like preemptively take out those things, right? And even under that framework, it is illegal. But then there's so many things that were just utterly stupid, like Donald Rumsfeld's absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. It's like, come on. This is even logically a flaw. This is logically mistaken, and any kind of first-year philosophy student can show you why this is an invalid argument. But it happened anyhow, and we had a war, and we have 500,000, 1 million dead Iraqis because of that decision. And the people who took the decision, they are now, they paint pretty pictures and then sell them for a lot of money because it's another one of these grift schemes it's just utterly horrible. So what we have had is this period of basically impunity, Western impunity, and this has then also led to a lot of what we are seeing right now of ideological lockstep that has been happening because, okay, over 30 years, countries, and even like Sweden and Finland and Switzerland and Austria, we all got accustomed to just being annexed to basically the US, or that's how I see it. And we followed that trajectory, even though now the world order, the way that it used to work, is changing rapidly in front of our eyes. And to get back to your original question, what my studies then indicate for that is this neutrality issue that is at the heart of what I do is a way of managing conflict, including war. And I think we need that. And neutrality, historically, from the way I study it, becomes most important and also flourishes in multipolar systems. And we are going towards one of that. And if we can use clever approaches to neutral policies, not just for countries, also for institutions like the Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, right? These institutions that need to act with both or all belligerents in a certain conflict. If we do that cleverly, we have a chance of dialing down the destructiveness of the wars to come. So I'm not even hoping to avoid the wars. I'm hoping to make them a little bit less horrible.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that insight. I'm curious how your conception of neutrality might have changed today compared to maybe when you were a student studying it, I don't know, 10 years ago, or when you were completing your PhD studies. Does it look the same today as it did at that time?
No. I conceptualize it completely differently. That's one of the reasons why I decided to throw all of my academic work also into that one, because I realized how I misconceptualized it. I misconceptualized it as not participating in anything and just trying to remain aloof and outside. And it's the opposite, actually. It's deep involvement into everything that's happening, necessarily, because especially during these times of high conflict, you get pushed into the whole thing. So I try to visualize that with a slide of mine. You know, we shouldn't imagine neutrals as standing in between belligerents. That's what we usually do, you know, the scale, right? You're in between, and that's a very bad metaphor. It's a much better metaphor to think of the neutrals as the third pole in a triangle.
Okay.
That are connected to both of the belligerents while not being part of their primary conflict. But you're still inside the conflict constellation, because both of these actors will try to influence you and push you or pull you. And then out of that constellation emerge policies of the belligerents towards the neutral and of the neutral towards the different belligerents. And then it depends on how history plays out, but that's the basics of it. So neutrals never ever have the luxury of staying aloof, or if they truly do, we usually don't even perceive them as neutral. In the way that Albania in the Cold War was so thoroughly isolated from all other countries that we don't even, usually we don't include Albania as a neutral. It's just like, it's just completely isolated from everything else. It tried not even to have external trade, or as little as necessary. Or, the man in the moon. If the man in the moon existed and looked out into the other side of the universe, of the moon, and had never heard of Russia and Ukraine, didn't know that they have a war, we wouldn't actually call that thing neutral. Being neutral implies knowledge of the conflict going on and taking and deciding how to act toward it. And that's this conceptualization of neutrality, something that I only arrived at through these studies, and that I think could be useful, and therefore I'm going to try to sell that intellectually as much as possible, to tell people, look, we could use that. It's a good tool. There's a tool. Pick up the tool.
Yeah. I'm curious, Pascal. Oh, forgive me. Please go on.
No, it's the irony of the whole thing is that I've also arrived at the conclusion that neutrality is a natural occurrence. You don't need brainy professors to tell you how it works. Politicians and countries and institutions usually pick it up by themselves, just out of sheer necessity, because there's nothing else left. So the irony is that I kind of also argue that people like me are actually not needed. But I think it's better to embrace the ironies of life than to try to argue them away.
Yes, to fight them at great loss
Mm.
of human life and other disaster. I'm curious what your conception of conventional sort of military alliances is in sort of a more multipolar context. And what you think the future of military alliances will be moving forward. Is that something that you view more favorably, or are you a little bit more leery of that?
No, I don't like military alliances for the same reason that I don't like bombs and weapons. They are tools of offensive defense, right? They're tools of
Sure.
trying to scare an adversary into not doing something, the typical kind of discourse around deterrence, right? So, and deterrence under IR theory, you know, one of the first things you learn if you take an IR course is the concept of the security dilemma. And the security dilemma is very simple. If one side of a conflict gets more weapons in order to feel more secure, then the other side will feel less secure because it sees it has proportionally less weapons now. So it will try to up its weapons production, or like the quality or quantity, whatever it is. And then it will feel secure, but then the other one will feel insecure, so it will create more weapons again. So the attempt at creating more security for yourself will end up making you less secure and will make both end up less secure. So game theoretically, it's like a lose-lose proposition, and you might end up in an escalatory spiral, which at the end might include, okay, we have to now take out their weapons in order to defend us, and then you have a war, right? That's the security dilemma. And now the alliances are another way of creating the same, right? You try to create security for one group of countries by adding more countries, but if you do that, you make the other side feel inherently less secure. Therefore,
Sure.
the other one will do something, and we've seen that in the Cold War. You know, NATO was founded first in 1949, and 4 or 5 years later, the Soviet Union then created the Warsaw Pact with a couple of others, and we've seen how they then create weapons and so on, and station these weapons in their satellite states and threaten each other. You know, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened because Khrushchev said if the Americans have their goddamn nuclear tip missiles in Turkey where they can reach us in like 15, 20 minutes and take out Moscow or even faster, then we're going to put some into Cuba and threaten them there. And well, that didn't go down very well, right? And the solution was that Kennedy and Khrushchev actually then agreed that Khrushchev publicly stops this, and Kennedy secretly withdraws the nuclear tip missiles from Turkey. So they both stepped away because they recognized each other's security interest, and which implies, of course, reasoning out of the shoes of the other, and understanding that the other one has a security the wish and need to fulfill as well. So, and alliances in that sense are part of this escalatory way of doing international politics. That's why I'm not a big fan of them. I understand that they do have use and can also lead to stability. Don't get me wrong, but what we are seeing at the moment, is that the only ones who play the alliance game, the military alliance game, is actually the Americans and, well, the Europeans, NATO. It's the last military alliance, real hard military alliance, although public media tries to sell to us the idea that now China and Russia are in an alliance. But again, if that is an alliance, if that's an alliance, a military alliance, then we need a new name for NATO. Because that thing is Russia and China saying, yeah, we're going to cooperate more with each other, we're going to trade, and we're going to send each other goods. China didn't even officially send any military weapons to Russia that it can use against Ukraine, because China is also interested in a positive relationship with China. China is interested in a positive relationship with Ukraine. It's the West that says like, oh, but the microchips that you're producing and some of the things end up in drones, and you're such an evil weapons producer, and you pump so many weapons into Ukraine. It's like, God damn it! I mean, what are your weapons doing there? It's your weapons that are being used by the Ukrainians. Come on, you're gaslighting us into believing that the Chinese are doing what you're doing on 100 times scale, right? So, but the point is, like, Russia and China are not in an alliance, and I can't see I don't believe that they will actually sign a hard treaty, you know, something like the North Atlantic Treaty, which then has an Article 5 saying like, okay, if somebody attacks you, then I will come and help you, and vice versa. China has such a contract only with one country only, and that's North Korea. And that treaty dates back to the late 40s or early 50s, a hard military alliance. But so that's the only one. And I don't see any country, also the BRICS states and so on, nobody is working on a new military alliance. NATO is really the only one who's trying to play that game, and the United States on the other side with the Japanese and so on, and play the military base game. So overall, I think this is a strategy of one corner of the world, but not of the rest. And I see the rest rather moving away from this and doing like economic cooperation and resilience building in their own corners, but not like gathering together for mutual defense. So in this sense, I do think we are moving way more toward a loose network, but not something that we've seen like during the Cold War when we had the two blocks, and at whose core was a real hard military alliance. The Warsaw Pact was a real hard military alliance. I don't see that being built.
I see. Yeah. On the subject of gaslighting, Pascal, which you already raised, I'm curious. I have been watching your channel grow quite excitedly. And I'm curious about what your impression is of the current media landscape and the hope for a renewed commitment to diplomacy. And I ask this because I've been encouraged by the development of alternative media platforms over the last few years. Do you share in this optimism?
Yes and no, because the growth of these alternative media platforms is something that we have seen, and it just attests to the fact that there is a lot of people who have a sense of being gaslit, or have a sense of something being wrong, like, you know, the objective reality you see and the media speech is not the same, and then you get this cognitive dissonance, and you get frustrated, and then you look for somebody, and then you find someone who can explain it to you, and then it gives you this relief. You get the dopamine, right?
Exactly.
So we're trying to be dopamine providers to some extent.
Sure. People just feel vindicated. Yeah.
Yeah, and people get that. That's the thing. So my hope is that a lot of people actually understand that something is seriously wrong, and that, you know, this market, this big market might actually lead to a change also in the media landscape. I mean, we see that in the US a little bit with the work that Tucker Carlson tries to do. And even though I don't agree with him on a lot of things, especially when it comes to this immigration issue and so on, I'm a lefty. I don't agree with that. But when it comes to war and peace, with Russia, then I agree. With China, I disagree. But it's fine. What the media landscape tries to tell us is that it's not okay to ever disagree with someone. If you disagree with him on one thing, then you need to outcast them and only believe us, because we will tell you what absolute truth is, and never disagree with us, because otherwise you're a bad person. And, you know, that's it's really that dumb. It's that dumb at this point. So my hope is that the critical mass needed in order to change that will be reached soon. And then we will see an amelioration also in the media in order to correct that. On the other hand, the other route it could go is more repression, and we've seen attempts at that as well, right? With crackdown on social media platforms, crackdown on free speech,
shadow banning.
entire shadow banning, but also the outright banning. Do you remember Parler? Parler was crushed, and now TikTok will be crushed for different reasons. But the state, also during Corona, has proved to us that the illusion we had for the last 30 years, you know, that civil society is so important, and, you know, at the end of the day, the state doesn't even matter that much because globalization, and we can go back and forth. No, at the end of the day, the state can and does crack down. When it really believes it's important, it will crack down on its own people, and it will lock you in for years if necessary, if it believes it's necessary, right? And it can do that, and it can crush Parler, it can crush media landscape, and it does that. And the Chinese do the same, right? China cracked down on its own IT industry because some of these industrialists, some of these Jack Ma and so on, they got too powerful, so they cracked down on them. And they can do that. And it's not just the communist or the authoritarian ones. No, the democratic states can do that too, and they do it. They just do it differently with a different jargon, but the outcome will be the same. So this is also something we could see. So I keep saying my channel in 2 years might be gone because the general legal environment will have changed, and YouTube will just start switching them off. You know, our channels, them being alive is really just a tick box in a spreadsheet somewhere in the Google headquarter. If you checkbox here, we are gone.
Yeah.
So it's also a way that it could go down. I am inherently an optimist, so I hope that your vision and the vision of enough people understanding this, and then the market and not the market, but this ecosystem, the social ecosystem, like pushing also some sense into CNN, MSNBC, and Fox and so on, will take place. But I can't be sure. It might be the other one, especially if we go into more warfare. You will need more unified messaging across the channel. So if we go toward a third world war, there will be the crackdown, and you and our voices will be cut out as much as it can, because the system has to. If war is the end, the system has to switch us off.
Sure. Pascal, that's an interesting thought. I'd like to talk about how you have sort of found a home for yourself intellectually. If you are young and you care about something, you have to find a home for whatever endeavor it is that you're pursuing. And it seems that you found a real home for yourself in academia. And I'm curious if you think that the culture of academia, sort of as it stands, is conducive to advancing more diplomacy in a meaningful, more substantive way. Or have you ever considered an alternate career path?
I did. The thing is, academia is good and bad. Academia is useful and a scam at the same time.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, some of the things we do in academia on a daily thing is like very scammy, in the sense that we are paid with public money in order to write articles that then become the private property of publishers, right? And then these publishers, they make S load of money. Yes. Really big money, and our institutions, they need to pay money to them in order to get access to the articles that we have written. That's just a scam. And but a lot of people don't conceive it as such. I mean, they don't see it. Okay, fine. And I am forced to participate in that one as well. I try not to, but my way out is to just make them more money, because the last books I bring out, I also raised £10,000 to pay to the publisher so that the book becomes open access. I'm like, okay, so at least people then can read it. At least the paywall is done. Okay, but apart from that, so academia has its good sides, and academia has its bad sides. Academia is difficult to survive in, because me too, at the moment, I'm on a 5-year contract. Getting tenured is difficult, and it takes a lot of time, and you're basically a nomad for like 10, 15 years of your life. And at the end of that, you're not guaranteed to remain inside. Yeah. They might kick you out at 45 or 50, and you will never find a proper position again. You can like teach on and off, and that's life. But if you're willing to take that risk, and if you're willing to do that, and if you find a space within this, then what comes with it is intellectual freedom, and you can explore certain issues. So that has been good for me. But also because I was lucky to find these positions, first at Waseda, a private institute in Tokyo, and now at Kyoto University, where I'm given the freedom. And in Europe and in the US, for instance, this freedom is much smaller, because usually you have to produce more. You have to publish in journals with impact factors, and that's another one of these scams that then keeps people online and working on certain issues and not on others. And in Japan, luckily, the Japanese don't care about that very much. They are just not that much into impact factors. So they're just like, okay, be here, do your work, publish something. So Japan, funnily enough, is much closer to this academic ideal of free thinking than many European institutions and American institutions do. And there's public funding. I can apply for, there's many different funding schemes that I can apply to in order to do my things, my research. So I'm going to organize a neutrality conference in October, and I got funding for that. And I can invite people, and then we can meet, and we can have discussions for 2 or 3 days, and then publish books out of that. And that is something that wouldn't be appreciated very much in other places. I mean, there too, but it might be more difficult for a fringe subject like mine, which is not, which would have, I mean, I think I would have almost no chances in Europe to get money for neutrality studies. In Japan, I do. So, at the end of the day, you've got to follow the opportunities.
Of course.
So.
Well, yeah, I think whether it's neutrality studies or humanitarian surgery, you have to figure out what the best setting to work is in.
Yeah.
And, academic institutions receive money from somewhere, usually sizably from the federal government. And so this in no small way influences the research that can get funded. So I was just curious if that has caused any tension for you personally as you navigate sort of the early stages of what will hopefully be a long and productive career.
Thank you. So far it has been good. This is one of the reasons why I will try to stay in Japan, apart from the fact that I love Japan and my partner is here, so
Yeah.
we will try to remain here. But it is actually conducive, and the challenge though in academia is that until you're tenured, you always live until the next deadline comes along, and it's sometimes hard deadlines. So it's something that I can recommend for people who are willing to take these risks. But for others, especially if you have family, you know, academia is very hard for people with family because you don't only care about yourself, you also have like little mouths to feed.
Yes.
For me, if everything else fails, I can still go and work in a convenience store or something and make enough money to support myself, because it's only me and my boyfriend, right? But if there was children, I would probably think differently.
Of course, of course. So that's a nice way to ask, Pascal. What do you hope to accomplish over the rest of your career?
Well, one of the things I want to do is I want to create a real theory of neutrality in international relations, and I'm working on that. I want to also grow the network of people who collaborate, because one of the things that really bothers me is that we have seen the complete, not the complete, but the partial collapse of the peace movement in Europe and the US, with some institutions selling themselves completely out, and we need to rebuild that. We need to rebuild a civil infrastructure of several institutions. And you know, the good thing is but they're all small. So one of the things that needs to happen is more networking among individuals like you and I who care, who then can work on their own without having to integrate into big pyramids kind of institutions. So that is something I want to help to work toward. I mean, idealistically, I want to work toward a world with less war. And concretely, I want to contribute to that from an academic perspective as much as possible. But my goal ultimately is a political one. So I have to do politics on one or another level. I'm not thinking of politics as in a national parliament, but politics as in trying to create or trying to help to be part of movements that push back against this warmongering and this social war is a social phenomenon, right? It's a sociological phenomenon. It without humans, no wars, no human wars. Ant wars maybe, but not. So you need humans. So I would like to impact that one a little bit. And I think a theory of neutrality and a theory of or contributing to IR theory in order to have a better grasp on how to dial problems up and down, or also how individuals like you and I can help with the dialing down. I think that would help. We don't have that. We have a lot of theories, but we see how, I mean, we end up in large warfare time and again. So whatever we have, for some reason, it's not operational. And I want to help to operationalize some of these peaceful approaches that we've got.
Sure. And so what will that look like for you? Going back, I'm curious about the political ambitions that you mentioned. What will that look like for you that will be in Japan?
From Japan, but engaging abroad, think tanks are not a bad way of trying to produce, academic content that then can be used by political actors, and books that influence people's thinking, right? I'm thinking of that kind of stuff. But also concretely, I'm now in Switzerland. We always there's these places where we can and cannot work by virtue of being a Swiss citizen. I can participate in the Swiss political process, even living abroad. And I'm engaging with this popular initiative that tries that is proposing a referendum on neutrality in Switzerland. And the popular initiative is a proper political tool in Switzerland. I can write a new article to our constitution, and then I send it to the Swiss government, and then they will check it and say like, okay, you can now start gathering signatures. And if I manage within 18 months to gather 100,000 signatures, then that proposal of mine will become a mandatory referendum. and the government cannot say no to this anymore. I mean, it will be a done deal. So there's a group of people who started that 2 years ago for neutrality, and I got involved with that, and we are now pushing from the left-hand side to support this, and we will do that over the next 3 years until it will be voted on. And although I'm not a parliamentarian or anything, but I can participate politically in such kind of activities in Switzerland, and that's something I'll do. And also worldwide, I'll try to make my writings and so on as accessible as possible in order for people who might be interested in this, I don't know, in Vietnam or in Mongolia or so, to find me and then ask me things, and then I'll try to tell them. And if they are parliamentarians, or if they are people who are interested in such steps, because my theory says neutrality grows naturally, locally. So I'll try to reach the people who locally are interested in something, and then I'll try to advise. And if that works, then all the better. And if it doesn't, then well, I'll just keep writing and telling people, look, this would be important. How about you try this?
So I'm curious, Pascal, there's a lot of, on the subject, I'm also very passionate about lowering the paywall to sort of academic research and exchange of ideas, which is a very steep paywall depending on where you are in the world.
Yes.
What advice would you have to young people who, maybe you get the same sense that I do, who very much want to expand their minds more broadly, but don't have the means or the ability to travel and explore other parts of the world and talk to people there and live in Switzerland and then go to Japan and really have the sort of what I would assume to be dialogues that in no small way influence how you perceive the importance of your work?
Well, my recommendation would be is ask yourself what's possible. What can you do? Don't ask yourself, oh, which country would I want to live in order to do my studies? Ask yourself, which country can I go to do my studies? Which places are actually open to me financially, visa-wise? And then live with the fact that a lot of things are not possible. You know, our dream scenarios won't be attainable, but within the realm of the possible, within what you find, what there is, choose one and then try to realize whatever you can with that. So don't look at it as a constraint, look at it as a way of finding the optimal opportunity at the moment, right?
Sure.
You don't need to.
Oh, sorry.
No, you don't need to stop dreaming, but look at what's possible. And then curiosity and developing yourself is something that you will do anyhow.
Sure.
Because you are curious. So you will naturally fulfill that. So find a way to sustain yourself and find a way to go forward and experiment with it. Sure. And you know, Cat Stevens, if you want to sing out, sing out. If you want to be free, be free. And if you find a new way, then you can do it today. So, sure. And you can change. You can change. Just try not to close options. Keep options open as long as possible. And only when necessary, close them down and go for ones. But yeah, try to have pathways open, not just, oh, I want to be a Harvard professor by the time I am 42. That one sets you up for failure. But where can I go next in order to do something I would like to do, like, or what could be interesting?
Of course. No, I very much feel the same. I think a lot of the criticism I hear levied at my compatriots here is that, you know, Americans don't have a sense of the world outside of America. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand that a lot of Americans can't afford to fly outside of America. So I was curious, as someone who sort of has this very global perspective, how we could make that more accessible for people who simply don't.
I only have, you know, I have Switzerland, I have Japan. I don't have much else. I did fly to other places, but I've never lived there. So, you know, we all live in bubbles.
Of course.
It's just the question is, how do you pierce your own?
Of course.
With the tools you have available. And curiosity and intelligence is not something that you get from university. It's something that you develop yourself, and then you just try to find ways to feed that and go to where it makes sense.
Of course. Well, Pascal, I know you have to head out, but before I let you go, any departing words of hope that you can think of when you look at it's quite bleak. The world today is very bleak. Is there anything sort of encouraging that you lean on to sort of make things a little bit brighter?
As a humanity, we have never been as prosperous as now. We've never been 8 billion on this planet. That's hopeful. And we've had 2 world wars and we still made it to 8 billion. I hope we don't need a third world war to go to 10. I hope we can prosper without this. And your life is yours. If somebody asks you go and kill that guy, just say no.
Yeah. Okay.
And treat them like you do.
Yeah.
Treat people.
Yes. Well, really, Pascal, thank you so much for your time this evening. I know you're very busy. I'm really so excited to follow neutrality studies in the next couple of years. What you've done is really
Thank you very much.
all right.
And we'll be in touch.
Of course. Take good care, and I look forward to following along.
You too. Thank you, Karin.